Welcome to .NET Rocks. This is Carl Franklin.
And this is Richard Campbell.
And I was just talking to you, Richard, before we started about some more wildlife that you're experiencing up on the river today.
This is my summer on the coast. We are in the Georgia Strait, or is also known as Salish Sea, on the Sunshine Coast. And so, the harbor seal's been hanging around. They usually come and check on us, and we've been watching a little pack of ravens. Looks like an older one, like a mother and 3 fledglings, learning to eat cockles, to shatter shells and pluck the bits out and so forth. So
that's so cool.
They're a bit rackety. You might hear them. They kick up a noise, and they've been working our waterfront for a while. Well,
I've been busy getting ready for Keto Fest and working a real job. It's been fun.
You've been busy. No kidding.
Yeah, I've been a busy person. But yesterday, I fixed 3 things in the studio all in the same morning. The phones were out.
Yeah.
The AC was dead.
Ouch.
And the light switch went out. So all 3 people were here at the same time fixing everything. But now it's like all ready to go.
Everything's working and good, and we're making shows.
Yeah,
That's
we're
awesome.
making shows and doing the crazy music for Better Know framework. Run that stuff.
All right, dude, what do you got?
Have you ever been to extensionmethod.net?
I don't think so.
Home of 797 extension methods for C#, VB, F#, Switch, Kotlin. I don't even know how to pronounce it. I've never seen that language before. Maybe Mads does. And JavaScript.
Wow.
Yeah. And you can search for them. How cool is that?
That is cool. That's a lot. Extensionmethod.net. I've not seen this.
I've never seen it either, but somebody pointed it out to me today. Yeah, very good. And just the ones on the front page are pretty cool.
Yeah, and Kotlin is a JVM language. It's the JetBrains guys. That's their sort of next generation thinking about mobile programming.
Very good.
Think of Kotlin like Swift, but for Android.
Well, there you go. That makes perfect sense now.
There you go.
Awesome.
That's it. That's our friends at JetBrains did that.
Yeah.
Hattie Hariri.
Hattie Harari.
And so there you go. Extensionmethod.net has all this good stuff.
All that good stuff. Who's talking to us today, Richard?
Grabbed a comment off of show 1314 from June of 2016 with Mr. Torgersen when we were talking about C#7. That was NDC Oslo.
Right.
I think that's where we really talked about this whole idea of the sort of Cambrian explosion that C# is transforming and the good things that were going on there. Got a few great comments on that. This one's from James Erie. Again, a couple of years ago that he made this comment where he said, really interesting to hear you talk about new things coming in C#, but also the difficulties in retrofitting new concepts into such a mature language.
Right.
On that note, I wondered, do you ever foresee a 4th .NET language being created and adopted? 4th? Dude, they came out day 1 with 22 languages. Not that they, stuck around all that long. But I guess when he means 4th, he means C#, VB.NET, F#. So that would be the 4th, which is, to this day, you can still buy COBOL.NET.
Not from
Fortran.NET. Well, they're in the marketplace.
Right.
They're a few $100s. IBM makes the Fortran.NET, and I think it's
Fujitsu
that maintains COBOL.NET.
Yeah.
James goes on to say, seeing how much traction Apple and Google have gained with Swift and Go simply by the virtue of being able to start over and learn from the past without being hamstrung by it, I can't help but think that a new, lightweight, simple language would add a lot to the .NET community. Now, I'm going to defer this one over to Mads, but, James has been a regular listener for a long time, and he's commented a few times. I'm sure he's got a mug already, but now I'm going to send him a copy of Music to Code By. So, James, thanks for your ongoing support. A copy of Music to Code By is on its way to you, and if you'd like a copy of Music to Code By, write a comment on the website at .NETRocks.com or via any of our social media, because we publish every show to Google Plus and Facebook. And if you comment there and we read it on the show, we'll send you a copy of Music to Code By.
And definitely follow us on Twitter. I'm at Carl Franklin. He's at Rich Campbell. Send us a tweet. .send or something like that. I don't know. I'm trying to extension method. I don't know. Didn't work. Sorry. I'm just not that fast anymore. Not today anyway. All right. Well, let's bring Mads on.
Slow.
Mads Torgersen is the program manager for the C# language at Microsoft and runs the C# design meetings. Prior to joining Microsoft in 2005, he was an associate professor at the University of Aarhus. Did I say that right?
That was pretty close.
All right.
The Danes will recognize that from what you said, yes.
Well, you were doing programming language research there, and you got snagged up by Microsoft, and boy, wasn't that a good idea.
Yeah, that was a fun turn.
Yeah. So what do you think of a fourth language? Is that ever going to happen?
Well, it certainly could. I think so James was referring to the increasing difficulty with shoehorning new things into a language that's getting bigger and bigger, because you kind of have to fit everything new in with everything existing without breaking anyone. And so that is a challenge for us as language designers and implementers to do. Our job, though, is to try to make it so that it doesn't feel like a challenge to the end developer, in that we keep hammering on it until it fits, and then we release it.
Right.
So, and I'm as surprised as anyone that we've been able to pull this off for so long, but it seems like so far we have. And so, while there are definitely things that we could clean up and do better next time and all that with a new language, there's a pretty high bar for doing that. Certainly, if you think of it as a replacement for C#, that would be very hard, because C# has so much adoption and it has so much there's just so many billions of lines of code out there, and people are generally very happy using C#. We continue to get good vibes, in surveys and stuff. So, So if we think about a replacement for C#, I think that our motivation is very low. Like, let's see when people start saying, "Oh, C# feels so old and gnarly," and okay, then we'll talk. But for now, there's just no reason to do it.
But I got to think you have moments in these battles that you have, these debates that you have, where it's like, wouldn't it be fun to have a clean slate?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Then I think, but hey, it's also kind of fun to have users,
Yeah, funny.
Yeah, well, that's the trade-off, isn't it? Because look, even if you do come out with some language that has new features that are for a specific purpose, all the C# people are going to want it, right? They're going to want it in C# because it's just such a Swiss Army knife. I can't think of anything that would stand by itself without causing a kerfuffle.
Right. But then there's is there room for another language next to C#?
Right.
And I think that's a different question, where maybe for a certain domain, or for people who grew up in a certain style of programming or whatever, maybe, there's an opening where a new language could do something that's hard to graft onto C#.
Yeah.
And I actually think that we've already seen that with F#, where even as C# is very eagerly adopting features from a functional viewpoint, we are never getting close to becoming an actual functional language. C# is not going to get the feel and the kind of that special, terse type inferred, curried vibe that a functional language has. And so if that does it for people, for certain mindsets or certain domains where that is particularly useful, then, F# is a great alternative to C#. And I absolutely encourage people to go use it if that works better for them, or they're just having more fun at work or whatever. So, I think F# is an example of, that can totally happen, and that can be a success next to C#. So I think I can certainly not rule out that there would be another one of those, but I just don't have what would be the specific thing that language would bring that would make room for it.
It most likely wouldn't be an object-oriented language, although I guess it would have to be if it's on the .NET framework. Yeah,
if it wants to interrupt with the APIs and the framework, which are mainly sort of object-oriented in design, then it probably would have.
Interesting.
Some object-oriented support. But F#, being at root a functional language, it has a fine object-oriented system inside as well. So you could totally imagine another language where it's not the main paradigm, but it can interrupt. So I don't know.
I'd also think in terms of C#, I don't feel as stale at all. It still seems like a language that other languages take ideas from. I mean, a sync and a wait have shown up all over the place now. And that was a C# idea, if I remember correctly.
JavaScript.
Yes. Certainly the way it was done was, that was something that we came up with for C#, yes. So I like to think that we participate on the cutting edge, that, sometimes we steal from other good ideas on the cutting edge, and sometimes we take we put on the yellow jersey, as they say in Tour de France, and we take the lead for a bit, and we're the ones who come up with the next feature. So that's definitely an ambition of ours, to be part of that state of the art of, at least of industrial programming languages, where we're sometimes the ones who come up with the great new feature that others are eager to mimic.
Yeah, that's got to be a good day when everybody wants that. That's the way to think about asynchronous programming. Like that's a win when folks want that in their language too.
Yeah, I feel pretty good about that.
When you have these C# design meetings, is there ever a feature somebody suggests that none of you guys had even thought about? Like, oh, wow, that's cool. I mean, it kind of seems like when you're putting together ideas, you have a backlog a mile long already.
We do. I think that it's very rare that somebody can completely surprise us with something out of left field where we're like, wow, never thought of that. It occasionally happens, more so in the small than in the large, where there's like a particular little nifty feature that's like, hey, that's kind of cool. I'm struggling to come up with a concrete example right now, but I know the feeling of that having happened. But yes, we do have a lot of exposure, both to people suggesting things for C# and also just to what other programming languages do. So it does take a lot to surprise us. But it's that kind of thing that we're on the lookout for as well, like those new perspectives, and even sort of the German of idea of how can you look at something differently, and all of a sudden a world of options opens up for a direction to take the language.
Have you ever had a suggestion for Visual Basic that seemed like it was a better fit in C# and ended up there instead?
Yeah, we probably have, but again, I can't. Yeah. It certainly happens. Yeah. I mean, we pool the ideas so I can, by the time we started to take an idea seriously, more often than not, I've lost track of where it originally came from.
Yeah, sure. Sure. That's awesome. So, you obviously feel a huge responsibility in doing any kind of changes to the language, and probably spend an inordinate amount of time trying to think of all of the ways that this could blow up existing code. And so your customers are also involved, aren't they?
Yeah. So we are fortunate now to be in a world where we can do this whole thing in a very open manner.
Right.
So all our design discussions are still they still take place in a closed meeting, but the notes from the meeting get published, and there's a whole lot of discussion on our GitHub site for C#, C# Lang under the .NET org.
Yeah.
And also we're getting better at releasing early prototypes of important features and having people use them on their code bases. So a good example is the feature of nullable reference types, which we're working on for the next major version of C#. And we've had now a few rounds of public prototypes of that feature because it needs a lot of adjustment, and we need to understand the effect that it has on sort of in real life. And people have been really good at picking it up and giving us good detailed feedback, both the positive and the negative. And it has really helped. It has really very much shaped the feedback that we got from that.
Would a nullable reference type be a special base class that things are inherited from, or would it affect all classes?
Yeah, so you're sort of asking about what the feature does.
I'm just trying to imagine what the impact would be.
Right. So the idea is that, similar to value types, you can mark a reference type as nullable when you use it. So let's say you have a string a class foo, you can mark a variable as being of type foo ? And that means that it's intended to be null. So the first sort of line of defense here is to give people a tool for expressing when a given variable or parameter, return value, and so on, whether it's supposed to be null or not. So you put a question mark on if it's supposed to be null. And now if you don't put a question mark on, well, it's not supposed to be null, which is sort of new in the language. Like you say string today, you mean something that might be null. But we're adding that differentiation so that we can then help you check whether you're acting according to the intent that you expressed like that. Yeah. And it's a very gnarly feature to add, to be honest, because it sort of changes the meaning of a naked reference type.
Right.
And it causes, all else equal, it will cause the compiler to start giving warnings on existing code, which is actually, that's part of the appeal of the feature, is that you could take your existing code and strengthen it. So you want to know about whenever you're sort of using a reference, let's say you put null into an existing reference type thingy, you'll now start getting a warning, and now you have to think about, well, did I mean putting the null in there? Then I should mark it nullable. And if I didn't, well, then I have a bug in my code that could lead to a null reference exception later, and I should not assign the null in there.
Right.
So it's sort of forcing you to think. But because it's starting to light up warnings on existing code, it's a feature that you'll have to opt into, because we don't want to break you without any warning. So it's the first language feature we're adding that actually needs an opt-in in order to be used. And it's cool, been very, getting it to where even when you do opt in, you don't get too many spurious false positives and whatnot. That it's not like a sea of warnings and totally sort of disheartening to you.
Yeah.
And you will turn it off and never use it again.
Right, never use it again. You know what this reminds me of? And man, I'm putting my old school hat on when I put this on. Adding option explicit to Visual Basic circa 1996.
Which was a good idea. For the same reason, it made you think.
Yeah, but when you turn that on, if you'd been lazy with your typing, like your code barfed a lot of warnings.
That's true. Yeah. And it is very similar. And we do have sort of a little trepidation because we made it this far without any options in the compiler for, what features should be on or off. But we think it's worth it. So we're willing to take this one, and hopefully it doesn't open the floodgates and we'll have 7 different dialects of C#. Honestly, the idea is that if we could, we would add this without an option. And we think everybody should eventually move to getting this extra level of expression of intent as well as, enforcement of intent.
Right. This is what type systems are for.
Yes.
Right? I mean, this is why you have static typing in the first place.
Right. So, it's we haven't decided yet, but it's quite possible that we'll release it in Visual Studio so that when you start a new project, it'll be on by default, right? So it's a new normal. And then you'll have to fight to get out of it for a new project. Whereas for legacy, not legacy necessarily, but just existing projects, we will let you say, okay, I'm ready to do this. Let me go do some work and get my code sort of null clean, if you will.
Yeah. Right. Null cleaned.
Yeah.
So it's always the transition period is the hard part. It's like, if it's going to be greenfield, this is a great feature, we'll be happy with it. But I need to be able to recompile this brownfield project, and I'm not prepared to take on the burden of straightening out all of my nulls.
Right. So a surprising amount of the design of the feature is not about how does it work semantically in the language, but it's also about what are the gestures that you can make around, like to what degree of granularity should you be able to express which part of your codes are opted into this new feature and which aren't, for instance,
right.
That kind of designing the experience around it so that you can approach this gradually and you don't get discouraged away.
Can I have a class or a DLL that does do this and a bunch that don't, so I could transform my code gradually, not make this all at once leap.
Right. And that's, and you certainly will be able to. But should we have granularity, all the way down into your code? We're not sure yet whether it's like per assembly or deeper than that.
Yeah. I can see why you don't want to go, it'll create its own mess if you get too granular too.
Right. Then you leave people, then they have to clean up from that after, sort of. So it's a very difficult balance.
There's only so many technical issues here. This is a people issue, a utilization issue with a span of experience and time and obligations for the developers. Like I got to bet that the ones that are the 200 plus comments on your blog post and that are in GitHub, the most active guys are definitely going to come at it from a different angle than your very large block of developers that write code as their job and don't move my cheese, man. Like just my code worked one day and it doesn't work today.
That's very true. And that's an interesting challenge in and of itself, actually. Even more so now that we're in the open in a way that the vocal part of the community isn't necessarily a representative part of the community.
Right.
I think that's probably not the case. So we have to be careful that we use the vocal community to understand ramifications and to get new ideas and to play off design ideas with, but we don't necessarily use them as a voting block for to represent the C# community. So we have to think that maybe the general C# developer would be a little more hesitant to be forced to spend a day putting question marks all over their code than the people on the site, for instance, who are probably more language eager and more like, hey, yeah, let me go play with this new thing. Let me push through with this,
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
Let me force this upon all my coworkers. So,
and Mads, give me one moment here for this very important message.
Hey, Carl here to say that Music to Code By is now an app called Music to Flow By. Now you can listen to the tracks on your phone with offline capability. The first 3 tracks are free, and the entire catalog is available by subscription with a new track arriving every month. Just go to musictoflowby.com for all the links.
And we're back. It's Carl Franklin and Richard Campbell. It's .NET Rocks. We're talking to the Mads Torgersen and talking about this the side effect of having a programming language that's been around this long and this widely adopted and loved is that those sort of activist members, those very engaged members of your community who are quick to respond are so different from the folks that are oblivious to this conversation even going on right now. But the moment you push that code out, you're going to hear from them.
Right.
That to me is the really challenging thing, is that the only thing they notice is when you get all the way to the update. And it's super easy to fall back on we've been talking about this in public for months. Where were you?
Right.
Yeah, that's just not going to cut it.
No, it's not good enough.
Just because it's public doesn't mean people are participating.
No, they're participating the way that matters the most. They use your product.
Right. So we still have the responsibility to build the right product. It's squarely on us, right? The community is doing us a favor by engaging us in early conversation, and as a benefit to them, we do more of the right thing, and all else equal are somewhat influenced by them. But at the end of the day, we're responsible for the rest of the millions of C# developers being also pretty happy with what we did. So we can't just lean back and listen to the voices coming at us. We also have to go out and seek out sort of the more representative view, and that's part of what we do as well.
Yeah, no, it's got to be interesting for you to push back against your enthusiasts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
For the sort of masses,
right? Because we're also enthusiasts. Like we get carried away by what's possible and by the technical challenges. We are like nerds, right? And that's sure. Required to do the job,
right?
But you so easily get carried away by, if we did this and then this and then this, and we add this new kind of type, and then we add this new kind of operator, and it all like clicks together, and we have this magic thing going on. Oh yeah, but wait, how's anyone actually going to be able to understand all that or adopt all that? So that, and a lot of the language design process is pushing back on ourselves and pushing. And sometimes that means an idea goes all the way back out to the trash bin. And sometimes it means that we keep simplifying it and reshaping it and mulling it over until all of a sudden, hey, this kind of makes sense. Now it's surprising how often a feature doesn't start with the grand idea or philosophy behind it. You'd think that we would be like, or maybe you think that we'll go in there and say, we need something that is sort of like this, and now we have to figure out the details. It sort of addresses this problem and has this kind of viewpoint, but that's totally not like, we'll play with details and we'll like it. Okay, this might solve this particular code problem, and if we do it this way and that way and so on. And only later will we get the insights, the aha moment that says, now we know what the philosophical backbone of the feature is. And now and only then are we in business, right? Now we can hone to that philosophy, and we can make the feature slick and consistent and coherent based on having that core idea. But it doesn't start out with that. Very rarely does it start out with that. So an example of that is the tuples feature that we put into C#7, which there's so many ways you could skin that cat of having tuples in a language. And the way we actually ended up doing it was very far from our minds when we started. But once we had that idea of like, what is the core idea here? Oh, the core idea is that the main use for tuples is to be certainly not the only, but like by far the main, the most common usage is going to be returning multiple things from a method. Okay. Right. Now we're in business, because now we can start putting up an analogy to parameter lists. We can say, okay, it should look like a parameter list. It should behave like a parameter list in terms of how you would expect it to work from a performance standpoint. Okay, parameter list copies all of its parameters on the stack. A return list, so to speak, in quotation marks, like a tuple, should also copy. Okay, so it should be a value type. Okay, parameters can be assigned. They're actually mutable, whether we like it or not. Okay, tuple element should also be assignable, whether we like it or not. So all of a sudden we have this guiding principle that we can build a beautiful, coherent feature around. Until then, we're just throwing around ideas, and it doesn't really gel.
Mm. I'm wondering if you guys have ever used the code base that is GitHub, all the GitHub repositories of C# projects, somehow automated downloading, loading, running, compiling against new versions of C# or looking for particular things that people are doing in their projects, maybe some machine learning. Have you guys used that?
We aren't very good at it yet. It's certainly, you could do simple things. You could certainly query for certain feature usages if they are, if they're easily distinguished syntactically, because you can just sort of text search for them. We don't have a good, I would like us to get somewhere someday to where we can build most of the public C# projects out there for the purposes of analyzing them.
Yeah.
But we're not nearly smart enough to do that yet, over GitHub repositories. But we do use them as a source of information.
Yeah.
We'll see how, as we get smarter, it's a way we can get, the Roslyn analyzers in there and learn something valuable about how people code, correlate that with timestamps and the evolution of projects. And you can also maybe start charting adoption of features. Maybe we can, if we're building a new feature, we're trying to figure out how commonly useful it's going to be. Maybe we can look for existing code patterns that it would replace or that it would improve.
Well, now that you own GitHub, that should be a lot easier. Yeah, you got GitHub and Azure. Surely you can do something there.
Sure. It's going to be easier in the sense that I guess we have the option of putting some of those features into GitHub instead of having to do it from the outside. But I don't think you'll see us starting to grok the people's private repos and stuff like that.
Yeah, private repos, that wouldn't be cool.
That would be terrible, right? So so we don't gain that much of an advantage from having GitHub here. It's something we could do almost just as well, even if GitHub was on its own.
Interesting. Well, Richard.
Yeah, buddy.
Guess what time it is now?
It must be that happy time again.
Yeah, it's time to announce a personal safety spray you can bring with you on vacation to Pamplona this week. It's called Nullable.
Oh, no.
Also turns out to be timely because the running of the bulls is this week.
Yeah. There's nothing else going in Pamplona. That's all I've been. 500 years ago, a group of sailors got a really stupid idea.
Hey,
but
what's
that's nothing compared to let's keep doing it. Like, really? Okay. This is Darwin in action right here, because there's only a certain number of genes that are going to get that think that's a good idea that are going to keep getting replaced.
This year's leader of the running of the bulls is Al Gore. Gore, get it? All right, never mind. I'm done.
Nonsense.
I'm done
Stop
with this.
the bad man.
Sorry. It's actually time to give away a $200 Amazon card to one lucky member of the .NET Rocks fan club, compliments of Progress Telerik. But first, let me tell you about Conversational UI from Progress Telerik and Kendo UI. Conversational UI are chatbot framework agnostic user interface controls and components that enable .NET and JavaScript developers to create modern conversational chatbot experiences in their web, mobile, and desktop applications. The industry's first packaged set of user interface components built specifically for chatbots are available as part of the company's Telerik ASP.NET Ajax, ASP.NET MVC, ASP.NET Core, WinForms, WPF, Xamarin products, and Kendo UI for jQuery, Angular, Vue, React, PHP, and JSP libraries. In other words, all of it. By implementing key UI design features such as calendars, date pickers, list views, and others that are included in the toolsets, developers will be able to improve chatbot conversation through visual elements that enhance the natural flow of conversation. For more information, visit telerik.com/conversational-UI.
Well, all right, buddy. Who's our winner?
Today's winner, Richard, is Chris Olivier.
Congratulations, Chris. Golf clap.
Congratulations.
Golf clap, Chris. And Chris just won a $200 gift card at Amazon.com from Progress Telerik just for being a member of the .NET Rocks fan club. And if you'd like to be a member, go to .NETRocks.com, click on the big Get Free Stuff button, answer a few questions, and you're in the fan club. We have thousands of members all over the world. In every show, we like to give away stuff from our sponsors. And every December, we give away a $5,000 technology shopping spree. And it's your turn, Mads. If you had $5,000 to spend on technology today, what would you buy?
That's such a hard question. You know, I'm not a gadget person.
You said that last time.
That's probably my 10-year budget for gadgets for my whole family, including, TVs and stuff. But okay, so first of all, I would get one of those key rings that I know you have that would let me know if my keys get too far from my phone. But that's probably a little less than 5,000. I don't know.
But you can buy a lot of them.
I can. I could make a little choir of them and perform.
There you go.
They're super annoying if you don't set them right.
I was thinking about this. You kind of tossed the question at me before the show went on. Before I had kids, I actually had time to sit down and listen to music. And in a couple of years' time, they'll hopefully all be out of the house. Maybe I should get a really good sound system. Maybe that's the thing I would get.
Nice.
Yeah. And it could be $5,000. It could be really, really good.
Right. And you could listen to music to code by and waste all that money.
Yeah, right?
You wouldn't even be listening to it. Yeah, that's cool.
I'm sure I'd still code better if the sound quality of it was good.
My
brainwaves would harmonize even better.
Yeah. So is there anything that you want to tell us about the next version of C#?
Well,
that we don't already know?
We're likely to call it 8. So that's
just
a little
guess,
secret
right?
for you right there.
You've been listening to .NET Rocks. We'll see you next week.
So, it's hard to tell you secrets because we're so open about things.
Yeah.
There's a list of approximately 24 features in the C# GitHub repo right now that still have C# 8 as a milestone. That's not gonna be where it ends up. Many of these are going to be triaged out or not going to make it. That's simply the list of things that we're working on in this time frame, and whichever ones make it will make it. But some notable ones that we talked about, the nullable reference types. I think that's going to be one of the flagship features. We would like to also have sort of the next, we mentioned async a little earlier in the program. The next step for async, we think is async streams. So having some async notion of IEnumerable that you can reach over and that you can produce from iterators in the language, but that have asynchronous waiting built into them so that, you can have streams that take time to beam at you and you can still reach over them in an async method.
Wow.
Wow,
cool.
So That I think is going to be pretty cool. We're talking about a feature that would actually require us to alter the runtime, which is kind of exciting. We haven't done that for language features since generics. And I think it's my hope is it's going to be the first of several. I'm thinking of it as a bit of a pilot feature for going back and doing more exciting stuff with interfaces and types in the runtime type system. We kind of want to get back into that. We're all aligned with the runtime team on that. So the first little feature there is it's actually not very innovative. It's something that Java already has, but that's kind of convenient, which is the ability to provide default implementations for members and interfaces. It gives you that ability to add a new member to an interface without breaking your existing implementers. As long as you provide a default implementation, they can pick up on if they don't explicitly implement that interface or that member.
Right. That's such a good idea. Why is it taking so long? That's such a good idea.
That's a great idea.
Because it requires runtime changes. And for whatever reason, we've been very adverse to doing those for a long time. A decade.
Now, when you say runtime changes, are you actually talking about the CLR?
Yes, the CLR.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that means you have to have a conversation with another team.
It means, we have a conversation with them often. It means we have to actually do collaboration with them.
Oh, my goodness.
And they have to also, we have to align on this being a good use of our time and resources.
Right.
And also, it's not just about team coordination, but it's about having sort of shied away from solving the problem of rolling out new runtimes to people and taking dependencies on new runtimes. It's been it's been a very easy life to just say, well, the new compiler for C# has more features, but they run on in all the same places, as long as the libraries are there.
Right.
Right.
And now it's a new kind of, not new, an old kind of dependency that we're coming back around to wanting to do, because we're realizing that to be honest, the C# compiler is producing more and more complicated output because we felt we had to do everything in the compiler. And I regret a little bit the features such as async and also as lambdas and so on. I regret not that we did them, that was great, but the way we did them without any participation of the runtime means that they're very, very complicated. It's hard for any intermediate tools to pick up on what's going on. And it's hard for the runtime to actually do the optimizations that it could if it knew more about where this came from. Because we rewrite, an async method, we rewrite into a very complicated state machine, allocate several objects sometimes that, just because we need to keep things longer than the stack. And some of that might not be necessary, but we have to do it defensively, not knowing what's going on at runtime. And the runtime can't help us because by the time the code runs, it's too late and it's lost the information about what we were actually trying to do.
Right.
So we need to get out of that mode.
Is there an energy to actually restructure those features to have more CLR participation in it?
Not right now.
Right.
That has daunting consequences in terms of backwards compatibility.
Oh, you're taking a feature that works and that people depend on it and writing it in a way where it might not work.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Or where it will work or not, depending on where you run. That's a problem for another day to go clean that up. I'm not saying we're not going to.
But first, let's stop going down that path of building everything into the compiler rather than working with the runtime.
Yes, first do no harm.
Yeah. And this is more of we're in a hole, let's stop digging.
Yes, exactly. I'm not saying those implementations are bad.
No.
And, things are actually chugging along pretty nicely for what we did, but it's just a strategy that it's not going to be sustainable for much longer. And it also keeps us from doing things that just are impossible to do with compiler tricks. So this is an example of one. The default interface implementation we just couldn't do with compiler tricks, not in a satisfactory way. So we're just saying, okay, let's get to work on how we can get back into the business of evolving the runtime for language features, and let's use this little one as a pilot feature, and then think about bigger ones once we're back in business, once we figure out how to get back in that business.
Sure, and it's interesting to hear you talk that way, because we really haven't heard since the open sourcing. There hasn't been a lot of action on the CLR other than it runs on all these platforms, which was a ton of work all by itself.
Right. And it's been a tough decade, in a sense, for the Runtime team, in that we have been very busy building new runtimes, some of which didn't last. Let's not dig into that too much. But,
I have a book about that. Thanks very much.
Yeah, right. And I think we're at a point now where we can say, hey, we don't have plans to build any more runtimes. Let's actually evolve the ones that we still have, and help each other make those better. And they are doing lots of work on that. Also, improving from a performance perspective, garbage collection, and so on. The runtimes are seeing a lot of improvement work right now. But sort of the next step will be also giving them new expressiveness. At least that's what we hope that we can venture into.
Well, it's an interesting set of motivation. I mean, clearly there's a difference when you're a runtime guy versus a language guy, where language guys are always the new feature, making it easier, better syntactic sugar, like just helping devs express themselves more effectively. The CLR got to fall very heavily on it works every place that people need it to work. It's as fast as it can be. And so like adding new features has got to come in third or fourth in that list.
Right. It can actually throw a spanner into the wheels, right? This new feature, now we can't make the assumptions that we used to. Oh my God, we're making those assumptions in a million places. How do we get back to as performant as before,
right,
while embracing this new thing? It's a very tough business.
Yeah. No, there are no easy jobs in this.
No.
They're different set of, I talk about this from an IT perspective when I have to wear that IT hat, which happens every so often, is also, my job is to keep systems up and running. And my biggest risk to the job is you coders, because you keep adding new under-tested code that, breaks my stuff.
Yes.
So, as long as we don't deploy software, this system's going to run great.
No more coding. Memo. There will be no more software development.
Yes.
In this software development shop.
Yeah. None of that. Yeah. It's got to be a balance. And I guess it's got to show that kind of long-term value of here's an easy win for this edition, but all these other great things that can come later that will depend on it as well.
Yes.
Yeah, very macro way to think. Of course, in the story collecting I've been doing around the book, just the number of times that they did implementations for different chipsets and different environments. Like, if Mac is really going to switch over to ARM, which seems to be the truth, that's going to be interesting for the CLR team too. It's like quickly they're going to have an important machine with a totally new architecture. They're going to have to be concerned about how well that runs.
It's definitely, just staying on top of the different hardware architectures, that's a big chunk of work right there.
Right.
Yeah. I'm not going to say Moore's Law is running down, but we are definitely getting to a point where it is time to seriously scrutinize the x86 infrastructure, the way that our current PCs are made, and say, is this right? Like, can't we do better? It's fundamentally the same stuff we've been running since the 1980s. We should probably, rethink some things. Sorry, the old hardware guy in me just showed up.
Yeah, that's fine. You know more about that than me, but you can certainly see, being higher up in the stack, you can see a lot of the challenges in that. Like, how do you, when everything depends on that being true, and everyone's gotten used to those 30 plus years of consistency, it's not easy to make a revolution. There's been many attempts at revolutionizing from the hardware up, and most of them haven't made it.
Right. Yeah.
Just because you got to bring the stacks on top of you along, or nobody's going to benefit from it.
We were talking to Scott Hunter about the new features in Core. One of them was a sort of a GUID or an ID that got passed along in an HTTP request and response from .NET Server to .NET Server without your knowledge of it. It just sort of slips under the radar. And then you can use that to trace calls from servers to servers. Does anything like that ever happen at the C# level? Where you have these sort of stealthy things that that you can use to trace across networks?
I don't know that shows up much at the language level. There's definitely, let's see. Not so much at the language level. There are things in sort of our execution infrastructure where there are various places to stash hidden state, if you will.
Right.
There are thread local variables and things like that. So the ASIC infrastructure relies heavily on being able to look up in ambient state and find the synchronization context that tells you where to resume executing once you're done waiting and stuff like that.
It's almost like they were implementing, the call stack across multiple servers, which is really what they're trying to do. I just think it's brilliant. It's really a question for Hunter, not for you.
Yeah, really. Yeah. You got to have him on next then.
Yeah. Well, we talked to him a couple of times in the last month or two.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
yeah.
The build time frame is always a busy time for conversations about this stuff as well.
Yep.
Should we go after more essential assumptions? You used to be an educator of development and a thinker in this space. We have this huge dependency on object orientation, but I think object orientation means a very different thing today than it meant, in the 80s and 90s when we were really talking about those sort of fundamental encapsulation, polymorphism, inheritance ideas. I'd love your take on this, Mads. How do you talk about it these days?
Well, I was thinking about that a little bit recently. I was given the keynote at NDC, and I decided to take this historical view of object-oriented programming, which started in Oslo 50 years ago. So it was kind of relevant to the
timing
situation.
Was good.
So timing was good, yeah. And there are definitely, at least there are ways in which object-oriented programming, as sort of like a pure standalone paradigm, is under pressure today. I think that the sort of the fine-grained encapsulation of mutable state, if you will, flies in the face of distributed programming, which, the web and cloud and everything is. You kind of want to at least temper that with one of the big things about object-oriented programming is the strong tie between the functionality and the state that you have in an object. Like there are methods right there in the class next to the state, and they define everything you can do with that state, and nobody else gets to touch it.
Right.
And I think that even though we call it object-oriented programming still, I think that you very rarely nowadays see classes where the state is actually truly hidden. You'll have these trivial properties that will expose it, and really they could just be public fields, right? It's just like we sort of have this remnant of sense of guilt if we make a field public, and maybe later I want to change it and I regret having made it a field, or
Yeah.
So I think that shows that kind of tight packing and hiding. It's good if you're only trying to do one thing in your program. And that was the case, 20, 30 years ago. A program was for one thing. You build an object-oriented model, but only with one purpose in mind. And then you build a different one or a variant of it, copy-paste, whatever, but usually built from scratch for another purpose, even if it's modeling the same external domain. And nowadays, data is much more separated from what you do with it, and it's much more long-lived and distributed. And so now it's really become better in many cases to describe the shape of the data separate from the functionality. And it's part of the realization of that, for instance, that caused us to put pattern matching into C#, which is really a way to get some of the benefits of virtual methods, where a virtual method can implement the same function differently depending on the shape of an object, but from inside the object. And pattern matching really lets you do that same thing from outside, where you switch over the shape of the object and you do different things depending on the shape. But you do it in one place for all the shapes, rather than doing it distributed over the shapes. And you do it in a way that's not inherent to the objects themselves. And I think that's I think both have value, and I think that we're all best off if those two paradigms coexist as seamlessly as possible. And that's kind of the ideal we're driving to in C#, I guess. But you definitely need to have that balance rather than full-on object-oriented encapsulation for many, many purposes today. That's probably the biggest shift that I see with object-oriented programming.
No, and I think it's a very important point, just recognizing, again, I keep putting my history hat on a lot of this stuff, but it's like a lot of these languages were designed in a time where a PC was not networked, had a single core processor and a very limited amount of memory. And
yes,
that was as far as it needed to reach. And so a lot of these designs that we turned into fundamentals were dependent on that. And now we don't live in that world. We live in a very different world from a hardware perspective, certainly.
Yes.
And our expectations about computing reflect that.
And so you might ask, so is object-oriented programming over? and that I will say no. I think that there's something else that's powerful about object-oriented programming, which is not so much the specific language features and exactly how they wire up, but the mode of thinking, that sort of conceptual modeling. That's one of the things that was strong from the beginning with Simula 50 years ago and really became the driving force of that kind of brand of object-oriented programming. It's been waxing and waning over time with many of the industrial programming languages, but the mode of writing the program in a way that sort of maps to the way you think about the domain, the way that the nouns are the key components, and the relationship between the nouns and the concepts that they describe. That was a large part of also the driving force between a lot of the sort of participatory design and object-oriented design wave, where it's easier to talk to customers that you're building software for about the software when you have concepts in the program that correspond to the concepts in the domain experts' brains.
Yeah, right. Nouns that map between the object model and the domain model.
Right. And sometimes I think that's almost the biggest victory of object-oriented programming, nifty as virtual methods are and all that, that the ability of the program to resemble somebody's description of their domain to a much higher degree. And I really hope that we can hold on to that even as we temper the object-oriented mechanisms with other mechanisms.
Right. No, I think that's good insight, Mads. That's the blend. And it isn't going to go away because it does serve that very well. The subtle aspects of things like mutexes and so forth represent a different tier of engineering and software that isn't concerned about the domain. It's concerned about scale and interoperability and things like that are really our problems, and we should work around them.
Right.
Well, this is all great stuff. Can't wait for number 8. It just keeps getting better.
Yeah, I can't wait for number 8 either. But I'm more like, I can't wait to get it out the door.
Yeah. Are you going to go on vacation after and relax a little bit?
That's probably likely. Let's see what time of year it ends up being.
Right.
But there's never a dull moment. We just had a design meeting yesterday where we were discussing some potential big features that are definitely going to be post C# 8. Because the big stuff has to be front loaded several versions sometimes ahead. Like the Nullable feature coming into 8 we've been working on that since way before 7 shipped. And it's going to be similar for some of the 9 features that we are now starting to look at what that might be. So it's not like a clear cycle where we just said, we just sit down and say, okay, we just shipped 7. What should 8 be like? And so on. There has to be an overlap. There are many, many trains, and there isn't a moment where they're all at a stop,
Right.
You also want to have people get deeply involved in 7, have code out in the field in 7, and get that real, 6 months later, here's how it's behaving. I had to go back and look at that thing that I wrote early on, and I thought about it differently now. Like, all of that is pretty powerful stuff. And it just takes time.
That's true, yeah.
Well, Mads, thank you very much for spending an hour with us again. And it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
It's wonderful. Thank you very much.
All right. And we'll talk to you next time on .NET Rocks. .NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Pwop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time.
Got transmitter banned by the FCC. Yes, I'm a toy boy.